Psychological biases are mental shortcuts or tendencies that affect our judgment and decision-making processes. These biases can lead us to make irrational or suboptimal choices, often without our conscious awareness. Understanding these biases is crucial because they influence various aspects of our lives, from personal relationships to professional decisions. By exploring some of the most common psychological biases, we can gain insight into how our minds work and learn strategies to mitigate their effects. Confirmation bias. Why do people often look for information that supports what they already believe? Confirmation bias is when people focus on information that confirms their existing beliefs and ignore anything that contradicts them. This can happen in many areas, from personal relationships to scientific research. For example, if someone believes a certain diet is the best for losing weight, they might only pay attention to success stories about that diet and ignore any evidence showing it might not work. This can make their beliefs stronger and harder to change, even when new information is available. In politics, confirmation bias can lead to division, as people only consume news that aligns with their views, reinforcing their beliefs and widening the gap between different groups. Anchoring bias. Have you noticed how the first piece of information you receive can heavily influence your decisions? Anchoring bias happens when people rely too much on the first piece of information they get, which then affects all subsequent judgments. This is common in negotiations, marketing, and everyday decisions. For instance, if a car dealer shows you a car with a high price first, you might think other cars are cheaper, even if they're still overpriced. Similarly, in salary negotiations, the initial offer can set the stage for the entire discussion, with both sides adjusting their expectations based on that first number. Being aware of this bias can help you question the influence of initial information on your decisions. Availability heuristic. Why do some events seem more likely just because they are more memorable or recent? The availability heuristic is a shortcut where people rely on immediate examples that come to mind when making decisions. This can lead to distorted views of risk and likelihood. For example, after seeing lots of news about plane crashes, someone might overestimate the danger of flying, even though statistics show it's safer than driving. Similarly, if a rare disease is frequently mentioned in the news, people might think it's more common than it is. This shows how media and personal experiences can shape our perception of reality, often making us overestimate the frequency of dramatic events. Hindsight bias. Why do events often seem more predictable after they happen? Hindsight bias is the tendency to see past events as more predictable than they really were. After something happens, people often think they knew it all along. This can affect how we learn from experiences and make future decisions. For example, after a company goes bankrupt, analysts might say the signs were obvious, even if they didn't predict it beforehand. Similarly, sports fans might claim they always knew their team would win, even if they had doubts during the season. This can lead to overconfidence in predicting future events and hinder learning from past mistakes. Self-serving bias. How do people protect their self-esteem when facing success and failure? Self-serving bias is when people attribute positive outcomes to their own abilities and negative outcomes to external factors. This helps maintain a positive self-image and can be seen in various contexts, from school to work. For instance, a student who gets a good grade might credit their intelligence, while blaming a poor grade on an unfair test. In the workplace, an employee might take credit for a successful project but blame failures on team dynamics. While this bias can boost self-esteem, it can also prevent learning from mistakes by not acknowledging them. Fundamental attribution error. Why do people often misjudge others' actions by focusing on personal traits over situational factors? The fundamental attribution error is when people overestimate the role of personality and underestimate situational factors when evaluating others' behavior. This can lead to misunderstandings. For example, if someone cuts you off in traffic, you might think they're rude, without considering they might be rushing to an emergency. In a workplace, if a colleague misses a deadline, you might assume they're lazy, rather than considering external pressures. Recognizing this bias can foster empathy by encouraging us to consider the broader context of people's actions. Overconfidence bias. Why do people often overestimate their abilities or knowledge? Overconfidence bias makes individuals believe they are more competent or knowledgeable than they actually are. This can lead to risky decisions. For example, a novice investor might be overly confident in picking stocks, leading to risky investments without proper research. In school, a student might overestimate their understanding of a subject, leading to inadequate study. Overconfidence can also affect workplaces, where leaders make strategic decisions without seeking input. Being aware of this bias can encourage humility and a more thorough evaluation of capabilities and decisions. Sunk cost fallacy. Why do people continue investing in a failing project? The sunk cost fallacy involves sticking with an endeavor because of previously invested resources, like time or money, rather than evaluating its current viability. This can lead to continued investment in failing projects or relationships. For example, someone might stay in a university program they dislike because they've already completed several semesters, even if switching would be better. In business, a company might keep funding a failing product line due to the resources already invested. Recognizing this bias can help make more rational decisions by focusing on future benefits instead of past investments. In-group bias. How does group membership affect perceptions and behaviors towards others? In-group bias is the tendency to favor one's own group over others. This can happen in social, professional, and cultural settings, leading to preferential treatment. For example, at work, employees might favor colleagues from their own department, even if others are equally qualified. Socially, people might show favoritism towards those who share their background or interests, sometimes leading to exclusion of others. While this bias can strengthen group identity, it can also cause division. Awareness of this bias can promote inclusivity by encouraging evaluation based on merit rather than group affiliation. Status quo bias. Why do people often prefer things to stay the same, even when change could be beneficial? Status quo bias is a preference for the current state of affairs, leading to resistance to change. This can affect decisions in personal, professional, and societal contexts. For example, an employee might stick with outdated software because they're used to it, even if newer versions are better. In personal finance, someone might stay with their current bank or investment strategy, even if better options exist, simply because they're familiar. Status quo bias can lead to missed opportunities for improvement. Recognizing this bias can encourage openness to change and exploring new possibilities. Optimism bias. Why do people often expect positive outcomes for themselves, even in uncertain situations? Optimism bias is the tendency to believe we are less likely to experience negative events and more likely to experience positive ones compared to others. This can influence many areas, from health to finances. For example, someone might underestimate their risk of a health condition, thinking it happens to others, leading to neglect of preventive measures. In finances, someone might assume they'll always have a stable income, leading to insufficient savings. While optimism can be motivating, excessive optimism can result in a lack of preparedness. Balancing optimism with realistic assessments can help make more informed decisions. Negativity bias. Why do negative events and experiences often impact us more than positive ones? Negativity bias is the tendency to focus more on negative experiences and information than positive ones. This can affect emotions, relationships, and decisions. For instance, if someone receives 10 compliments and 1 criticism, they might dwell on the criticism more, affecting their self-esteem. In media, people might focus more on negative news, perceiving the world as more dangerous. Negativity bias can lead to stress and strained relationships if people focus on negatives rather than positives. Being aware of this bias can help individuals appreciate positive experiences and feedback. Bandwagon effect. Why do people often adopt beliefs or behaviors just because they are popular? The bandwagon effect is the tendency to align with the opinions or actions of a larger group without critical evaluation. This can influence trends in fashion, technology, and politics. For example, someone might start using a new social media platform because all their friends are using it, not because they find it useful. In politics, people might support a candidate because they appear popular, not based on analysis. The bandwagon effect can lead to conformity and lack of diversity in thought. Recognizing this bias can encourage independent thinking and critical evaluation. Framing effect: how does the way information is presented influence our decisions? The framing effect occurs when people react differently to the same information based on how it is presented. This can impact choices in marketing, health communication, and policy. For example, a product labeled 90% fat-free might be more appealing than one labeled contains 10% fat, even though they're the same. In healthcare, patients might prefer a treatment described as having a 90% survival rate, rather than a 10% mortality rate, despite the outcomes being the same. The framing effect shows how language and context shape perceptions. Being aware of this bias can help make more informed choices. Dunning-Kruger effect: why do people with limited knowledge often overestimate their abilities? The Dunning-Kruger effect is when people with low ability overestimate their skills, while those with high ability underestimate theirs. This can lead to overconfidence and poor decisions. For example, a beginner chess player might think they're much better than they are, not realizing the game's complexity. In a workplace, an employee with limited expertise might take on tasks beyond their capabilities. Conversely, experts might doubt their abilities because they understand the complexities involved. Recognizing this bias can encourage humility, continuous learning, and appreciation of others' expertise. Conclusion: in conclusion, psychological biases are inherent in human cognition, shaping how we perceive and interact with the world. While these biases can lead to errors in judgment, awareness and understanding of them can help us make more informed and rational decisions. By recognizing the presence of biases such as confirmation bias, anchoring bias, and the Dunning-Kruger effect, among others, we can strive to minimize their impact on our daily lives. Ultimately, cultivating mindfulness and critical thinking can empower us to overcome these cognitive pitfalls, leading to better outcomes in both personal and professional spheres.